You may or may not have seen some videos hit your YouTube feeds about whether the OSR is dying or not, or responses to whether the OSR is dying or not. I sure have on my feed. And I looked a little bit into the videos. I'm really not going to get into the specifics of the is it dying yes or is it dying no, because from my perspective, I'm just ready to blow the whole thing up, blow it up, and start from scratch. Start over. Start anew. Let me explain. If we're going to look at the question of whether or not the OSR is dying, we first really need to define what the OSR is. And if you've followed my channel, if you've been around the interwebs, everybody and their cousin, myself included, has tried to define the OSR, and nobody, myself included, has really come up with an answer that satisfies everyone. And I think the reason for this is that the OSR is not one thing. It's actually three things. Let me break down each one of these. I think that will help explain some of the confusion and also help explain why I'm ready to do away with the whole thing. So the first thing is OSR, the letters OSR, stand for either old school revival or old school renaissance. Once we spell those out, we can see that those refer to a moment in time or a period in time in the tabletop role-playing game histories at which people began to look back at, say, pre-1990s era D&D and D&D adjacent games and see these things that maybe were not forgotten in a sense, but were out of reach of your everyday tabletop role-playing gamer. Decide to look back and kind of bring them back into the spotlight, take the dust off of them, create retro clones so that folks could try these games without having to pay the kind of exorbitant prices that were happening in the secondary market. Really bring it back in. Now, that's a moment that happened. And of course, as a renaissance, as a movement over time, things changed. You went from literally, let's bring back as close a copy of, say, AD&D as we can, to, well, what if we do things a little bit differently? And then what if we kind of extend our thinking about what it means to be based upon those games? All that stuff kind of happened. But I think it's happened. The revival has occurred. The corpus was revived. The angelic choirs sang their hosannas. It's done. It's happened. That's the first OSR. The second OSR is the label. This is probably what we're most used to seeing in our lives now, are things that are labeled OSR. This is OSR. We stamp the OSR on it. Great. On our blogs, on our products, on our YouTube channels. Boom. OSR. What does that label mean? It's gone through some transformations. I would argue it may even still be transforming, and it doesn't mean the same thing anymore. It's vastly different than, say, a stamp that says 5th edition compatible or D20, because those things have a simple, very defined technical specification. If you are 5th edition compatible, that means that whatever your content is, you can use it if you're playing in a 5th edition D&D framework. That's it. It doesn't say anything about what you're trying to do with the game. Doesn't say anything about your influences. Doesn't say anything about your views, your philosophies, nothing. It's a simple technical, bam, this works with 5th edition. Same thing. If you say your game is, and this is probably, you might not even see this very much anymore, but certainly in the 3.5 days with the SRDs first came out into existence, and you saw all the D20 compatible content come out. That meant that you were using some variation of the D20 system. That's all it meant. It didn't mean, oh, we're based on this version. It didn't mean, oh, we're trying to do this. No, it was just technically these rules. You can play with these. Let's do it. OSR meant that at one point. I think back at the beginning, if you said your product was OSR, it meant something akin to 5th edition compatible or D20 system. Something, I saw someone bring this up the other day that I thought was good in terms of this was their version of what the OSR meant, but I think it fits very well for this technical aspect of the label was, can I play Keep on the Borderlands with it? Can I take whatever this content is, integrate it with Keep on the Borderlands, and run it with minimal muss and fuss? Yes, okay, that OSR. And for a time, that was probably true. That was probably good. Yes, boom, there's a stamp, OSR. But it doesn't mean that. I think if you've looked anywhere in the marketplace, if you looked in the blogosphere, OSR can mean lots of things. It can just mean, well, we're sort of in the same ballpark as those other things. Or we are related to a system that was related to a system that was related to a system that was OSR, or we are in the spirit of a certain type of role playing that we now equate with the OSR, or any number of other things, so that when you or I or anyone else goes and they look at a blog and they look at a piece of content, or they find a book on Itch or Drive Through or in a brick and mortar gaming store, sees OSR stamped in some way on there, we can't say for certain what that means. I can't look at something that says stamped OSR and know that that means I can run Keep on the Borderlands with it, no muss, no fuss. And certainly I can't say that this means that it's in some way related in any kind of first generation sense to old school D&D. It could mean any number of things. It's kind of become almost a synonym in some ways for a lot of just indie gaming of a certain style. I guess maybe kind of fantasy indie gaming, though maybe that's not even true, because you have games like Stars Without Number or Mothership that, depending on who you talk to, would be considered OSR, and they're not even in the fantasy realm. So who knows, when you stamp something in a product OSR and somebody reads it, what they really take from that label. And of course, nothing is good or bad. I'm not trying to defend one or the other, but it simply means that when someone uses the label OSR, it's become so broad that it almost is meaningless. Sure, we can say for that it's OSR, that it's not 5th edition. Okay, but that's about it. Can we really say with certainty anything else when we look at the label now? If this is OSR, what that means, what I can look at that, what is the shorthand that comes with that label? I think it's very few and far between. And that's why I think, as a lot of us who have tried to define OSR, we've maybe fixated on the label part. And that's why it's been such a frustrating experience, such an unfulfilling experience. It's because how can we define something that has morphed into matching many different kinds of definitions? And then finally, thirdly, we have communities. Some folks have argued about, does there existence of a community or not? I think what we're talking about when we see this argument is really, there is no singular community. There certainly is no single community. There's certainly no authority to a single community to say whether you are allowed in here or not. You simply cannot stop people, much like with the label OSR, from creating their own communities or claiming to be OSR, whether they fit it or not. But then, of course, how are you defining OSR to begin with? So who are you to say who belongs and who doesn't belong? Many communities, and not all of them really fit together in a way, but we're all stuck together under the umbrella. For example, when I was at ShireCon a week ago, a lot of those players, maybe most of them, I would say, I wouldn't call OSR players. They're old school players. They never stopped. These are folks who were playing AD&D back in the day when it was just the school, and they just kept playing AD&D or variations thereof, or their own homebrew systems or whatever of that. And they just kept playing. So they didn't revive. They were never gone. They just didn't have any kind of spotlight on them. They didn't have a good label. They were just playing gaming. I mean, what did you call someone who was old school gaming when it was just 1 edition behind or 2 editions behind? You didn't say, ooh, that's old school. I remember when I was playing in a 4th edition game and the GM's brother was still running 2nd edition. I didn't say, ooh, that's old school. I was just like, okay, they're playing 2nd edition. Great. So they've just been around, and OSR maybe just put the spotlight on them or allowed them to kind of group together bigger than their maybe local conglomerations allowed. But that's really about it. Then you have the folks who came in with the revival who thought, oh, great, this is new. I didn't really have a chance to experience this before, or I only remember it when I was very young, or some other variation of that, and got into playing some version of OSR. And then there are folks who became really energized by a lot of maybe the mechanics, the philosophies, the play styles, but don't really care for some of the other things. And they picked and choose what they wanted, and they created wonderful games. And then those games spawned other games, and those games spawned other games. Maybe I would call this what they've called themselves the new school revival, the games that branched off the OSR evolutionary tree, if you want, or the old school evolutionary tree through the revival, but in many ways don't have that much in common with the actual old school or hardcore retro clone kind of rules, or the old school itself. And a lot of these groups, philosophies may be different, what they're trying to accomplish may be different, but we all get stuck together on this big umbrella term called the OSR. And frankly, I'm ready to be done with it. I was ready to be done with it when a year ago or 2 years ago, maybe at this point when I did that, what is the OSR? I guess that was in 2021, so maybe a year ago. I was ready to kind of blow it up then. I am definitely ready to blow it up now. I think what we need is some kind of school revolution, the SR or the ASR or the all school revolution, the high school revolution, the no school revolution, where we just blow things up, right? That's what revolutions are all about. We're going to burn things down. There will be blood. and we're going to remake a new world or multiple new worlds. And I am down with it. I'm down for it. I want to be able to go back to and have some technical things that we can post on our content that let folks know at a glance what it means. Something that says, if we mean it to, hey, this is compatible with your old school D&D specifically, or even a specific system. Maybe we could call it 1980 compatible or 1985 compatible, whatever you want. That it's basically compatible with all that stuff. Or we just, I don't know, can we just say AD&D compatible? I don't know. I'm not trying. Wizards, don't come at me. I don't know what we should call it, something like that. If we want to say some other things about our systems or our content, maybe we can just be plain. Let's get back to plain speaking. I mean, what do people do with 5th edition content? I mean, there's oodles and oodles of it that is in all kinds of different realms. They must have ways to talk about it. We should come up with ways to talk about it. Now, I can't force communities. I can't go to the OSR subreddit and say, hey, man, change the name to something else. Not that I have a name, because, well, we're still all together there. And look, it's going to take, this is a Titanic at this point, even though the OSR itself is a mere, just not even a puddle in the ocean of tabletop role-playing community. It's still, from the aspect of individuals like myself, it is a Titanic, and I am in no way in a position of any kind of authority to be able to get it to turn. I'm not sure what we should call ourselves. Maybe our community should just be about what we're playing and maybe stop using such a broad umbrella term. We need new terms, is what I'm saying. We need something new. We need a new OSR that's not called OSR, that can be more specific, that can give us what we want. Now, before I go, I do want to address a couple of things. When I did look at the video in particular, the person who made the video talked about these kind of elephants in the room, these actors, bad actors that are spotlit in the OSR and give the OSR a bad name, and according to their sources, were causing people to leave the OSR. Now, I don't know what that means. We've just gone through saying, when they say leave the OSR, does that mean no longer labeling their games as OSR? Does that mean not being part of the OSR community? Does it mean not making their rules compatible with the old school? I don't know. I tend to think it's more of a community thing. But I think the thing we should keep in mind is the internet blows things up completely out of proportion. I said this story a number of times when I was at PAX East, and I sat down to play a very indie role-playing game with folks who were all young, obviously kind of hip to the scene. This was a game that was downloaded from itch, so it wasn't something that it was a big box store. It was a very kind of indie game. These are all folks who are aware of that game, who are on itch, who were looking at gaming stuff. They had no idea what the OSR is. No idea at all. So all the elephants in our rooms are like ants, just walking around the anthill of tabletop role-playing in general, even in the kind of indie scene. I think the second thing is that keeping in mind that, yes, there's no authority on the OSR. All we can do is try to tend to our gardens. And if you follow my channel at all, if you're subscribed, you may know this. I try to have a positive attitude. I try to ding the stuff I think needs dinged, but I try to just point people towards the stuff I want to point to. And if there's somebody who's talking loud and proclaiming some product and they don't stand for the things that you stand for, then the way you can really help is not only to call out those people, but to send people towards the things that are good. If you don't like this, here is this other thing. I've had to do that a few times. I will continue to do that, but that's what we can do. We can tend to our gardens. But I think the thing is that these actors that this person called the elephants in the room, they're not elephants in the room. They get very little air. Nobody is really, we give them, I think oftentimes the folks who are against them give them more oxygen than they get themselves. They don't. And in terms of some of the things that might have been on people's news radars, it's all been in a negative light. And frankly, I haven't seen OSR mentioned in any of them. So I think this idea that these folks are giving the OSR a bad name, they're giving themselves a bad name. They're giving their games and their content a bad name. I don't think anyone thinks if someone puts out some 5th edition product that's garbage, they suddenly paint everything 5th edition by that same brush. I think people are a little bit better than that. And let's keep calling them out. Let's keep fighting the good fight, if you will. But let's also just know and say and acknowledge that the OSR isn't one thing. And the fact that we have these bad actors who each have their own adherents and they have their own supporters and folks who agree with them and think like them, and like the stuff they're doing, or at least don't object the way we do, is the fact is that there isn't one OSR, and we need to just say, hey, there isn't one. So guess what? Let's stop trying to be all under this umbrella. Let's blow it up. Let's bring something new. I want to hear from folks. What do you think we should do? I don't think we can just have one new name. The idea is not to replace one umbrella term with another. It's to try to find what are the main driving forces? What are the main characteristics of different parts of the OSR that more or less group together in some way, whether it's mechanically, whether it's setting wise in terms of sword and sorcery versus Gonzo versus something else. Maybe we can come up with a series of things. Maybe we can come up with something like, with Creative Commons, you can have all these different versions of the Creative Commons, and that they read a little bit differently, and you can look them up, and they have a little bit different rules. Oh, yes, attribution allowed, attribution share and share alike. Maybe we need to come up with our own Creative Commons, and a Creative Commons of, I don't even know of what, and we can link to it. We can come up with a little book that says, hey, if you stamp this on your guide, if you stamp this on your blog, this is what it means. All I can tell you, I don't know. I'm up for ideas, but all I'm ready for is I'm ready for a change. I'm ready for something new. All hail the school revolution. Game on. I'll talk to you later.